Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Dan.
This
Stone.
is Dexter from The
This
Offspring.
is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is David Labb.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick
I'm
Gillette.
Krista
This is
Vernoff.
Dr. Bob Greenberg.
I'm Laird Hamilton.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, I'm Mark Valley.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Michele Rigby Assad, author of Breaking Cover, and you're with The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero, Mark Valley, and Pete A. Turner.
Perfect. Michele Rigby Assad grew up in rural Central Florida. She got her education at Georgetown, where she was recruited by the CIA to work in the clandestine service, which means she and her husband Joseph worked in the most dangerous places in the Middle East, where they gathered intelligence to thwart terrorist attacks. She's written a book, like you said, Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For. Michele, it's an honor to have you. Thanks for saving who knows how many lives you guys saved. And thanks for writing a book and telling us all about it. And thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. Very excited to be with you guys today.
I was talking with my friend George. We were talking about the Jack Barsky episode we put up, and we all work in the same venue. One of the things he wanted to know was, how do we maintain our integrity? You know, and it's a good question, because our job is to go find and interact with either the most evil people in the world or their best friends. So,
sure.
Right? So
yeah.
How do you, and we all have a different formula. One of the things I've realized from talking to a bunch of our peers is we are a martial art in and of ourselves, and that we have a prowess for combat, for war. It's just our form of war is not a gun. It's words and intrigue. So how do you, in a world of intrigue and dealing with just absolute looking evil in the eye and selling them that you're like, yeah, I'm not judging you. How do you maintain integrity in your day-to-day life?
So that's such a great question, and people really want to understand that, because we're all lying because we're undercover, but yet we're supposed to tell the truth. And so it's a strange dichotomy in your life. For me, you're supposed to collect the unvarnished truth to hand over to the government and to policymakers. And so for me, I never had a problem with doing that. And of course, not everybody's honest. I mean, I had colleagues that were not honest. So there were challenges in dealing with making sure that we did get, the right information. But it was so very important to be able to critique yourself and your own sources. Because as you guys know, if you end up putting out intelligence that's a fabrication, you're putting your military brethren's lives on the line to action that intelligence. And so you have to really keep an open mind, like, is my source good? Is his information good? And is my ego so tied to this case that I can't look at it objectively and look at what's the best for all of us?
Yeah, you talked about some of that stuff in the book, and the, we come from the same world. We get it. And as I read your book, I think I told you it was really hard for me to read the book, because every 200 words, I'd have to stop and reflect on my own similar experience. And I worked with a lot of green counterintelligence agents that we needed them faster than we could get them seasoned. So they would come in. And one of the mantras I had was who is running who?
Yes.
And then why do you think that you are the person running this person? Talk a little bit about, because we both spent time, I guarantee you we've been in the green zone at the same time, if not in the same building at the same time, but talk about how you deal with that, because it is an ego battle to go, I don't know, I mean, I'm doing my best out here, but I could be the one buying the goods.
Right. I mean, you have to really check your ego at the door, but I can tell you that there are a lot of my colleagues that it just, couldn't do that, because they've invested in this source and they've invested heavily. And so they want to believe that source is there for them because of the trust that they've established with each other. A lot of them also did not understand Arab culture. And so I brought something unique to the table in the sense that I had spent so much time studying Arab culture, both in a classroom and on the street. And so I could see a lot of these nonverbals that the sources were giving to the case officers to indicate, you're my buddy and I'm doing this for you. And I could see that, in fact, they didn't really respect the case officer. And so for me, it was very clear on who was running who. Because, again, a lot of these people had no experience in the Middle East and were bringing their American culture. straight in the door with them and didn't know how to evaluate what they were getting from their sources. So even though we were told, in training, all of us, don't fall in love with your source, it happened all the time.
Wow. That they had to train that out, because it seems like one of those things that you shouldn't have to say to a trained, experienced operative that you would put in that situation, but it has to be said. And one of the odd things for me, if I look at your picture, I wonder how much you can pass for an Arab woman, but then you bring up the nonverbal communication, and that's where the passing happens, because it's not just a visible. I mean, I know you have darkish hair, but you don't have really dark hair, and you have a complexion that I imagine responds to the sun, but you don't really look like textbook Arab. But when
I
never
tried to pass for that. So, and nobody was ever under the impression that I was an Arab. So that was not, it was very clear when I walked through the door, I was a Westerner. So when I was dealing with sources, I didn't try to pretend I was something else. But when I spoke Arabic, it confused them. And then they thought, okay, well, maybe she's Lebanese. Because as you know, there are a lot of very light-skinned Lebanese. So what made a difference was the fact that I could speak some Arabic. And so that went a long way in establishing bona fides with my sources that, again, a lot of my colleagues didn't have. But Arabs, being a very gracious group of people, appreciated any attempt at learning Arabic. So that was very helpful to me.
So it's not that you blended in, but you made yourself not a stranger.
There you go. Oh, yeah. Good. That was good.
How crazy was modern standard Arabic versus the many different dialects that you encountered in Iraq? How hard was that for you as someone who's, you pride yourself in your ability to speak the language, and then you get somewhere and you're like, what the hell is a dibshi?
Horrible. Let me just tell you, most of the time they could understand me, and I had no idea what they were saying. Yeah. So here's Michelle. How art thou this fine day? I'm sounding all Shakespearean in my Arabic. And then they're just trying to talk their own variant of Arabic, which I rarely understood.
Yeah, where I was at, it was in Baghdad. It was a really rural farming area. And obviously the dialogue there, the vocabulary was very specific to that region and what they called certain things. And, farm tools, who studies that,
Right.
And so these are Arab-born, Middle Eastern-born interpreters that I'm working with, but they live in America. And they would look at me and say, he's talking about farm tools. That's good enough. And I'm like, yeah, man, that's good. I don't need to know if it's like a clamshell digger or something like that. It was
right.
I'll cut it out, Pete. You got on because you know how to eat a pomegranate and you like to eat goat.
Yeah, I do like to eat goat and lamb. Oh my gosh. What did you pick up in terms of culture as you obviously you spent time in Egypt, you're familiar with the region in general, you had an assignment in another country, you talk about it in the book, but obviously not specifically because it's that's the sexy stuff, is there's things that we both can't talk about. Like I've been to places in the African continent and that's all I got. So and when you get there, how you develop a capacity, because of people like us, we have to see what's there. Like you have a willingness to say, it's okay that this is different. It will make sense if it comes to me. Suss out for me how you figure that out, especially when a lot of the time you spend in a very controlled environment, not necessarily outside in the cafes like you might in, say, Europe or something like that.
Right. So for me, it was because I had a lot of substantive knowledge of the region, I could figure out very quickly when I was getting intelligence that didn't make sense. It just didn't pass like the basic logic test. And a lot of my colleagues, some of my colleagues who didn't know the difference between Sunni and Shia, were just snowed over by really dumb intelligence because they just didn't know to question it. And secondly, with those fabricators or double agents that were fairly good liars, it was looking at the nonverbals or noticing the nonverbals that gave me a clue that there was something not quite right with the case. So as you probably know from the book, one of the biggest was that meeting several alleged al-Qaeda emirs and realizing they didn't handle themselves like all the real terrorists I dealt with. They didn't have the ego. They didn't have the presence. They didn't fill the room up when they walked in. And so some of the first indications that a case was bad was the fact that, wait a minute, this guy's not acting right.
Yeah, I've seen that as well in town where like that's a sheikh and this guy's a sayyid. For the audience, these are important leaders, either religiously or they're a person of accomplishment. But then you see them in town on a different patrol and they're not treated with the same respect. And it's like, oh.
Yes, right?
Yeah, that dude might be a cobbler, you know? So he's portrayed himself to us because we don't know any better as being something that he's not. And you're right. Great information comes walking in the door. And that's the first part of the equation. I wanted to ask you about, instead of necessarily double agents, but like 1.5 agents, where they are definitely willing to work with you, but they're definitely willing to work with the enemy. And they're not beholden to either be outside of their own survival.
Yeah.
I know you encountered this. Talk a little bit about those experiences.
Yeah, those guys are the ones that I would always say, which way is the wind blowing today? Oh, that direction, that's where I'm going. So really it was, I always try to remind people, it's all about knowing that the person you're dealing with is always going to act in their best interests. So it behooves me as an intelligence officer to know what is in that guy's best interest right now, because whatever that is, that's what he's up to. That's why we're all trained to understand somebody's motivations. Motivations are critical. And so one day that guy worked for this insurgent group, and a week later he worked for the other insurgent group, depending on who gave him the more money, who had weapons, who was the strongest guy on the street that day. It was and they all learned, like in Iraq, as you know, Saddam Hussein, under that culture, you had to know which way the wind was blowing because it was a matter of life and death.
I think we should really punctuate that for our listeners, because with regard to the way that people behaved and the way that they had to read their circumstances, it's not that they were acting in their best interest out of convenience. They had to act in their best interest to stay alive. And
yeah.
I know that a lot of our listeners, especially from Pete's community, are going to understand all of those things. But we have a lot of listeners who come to us who are really green on the topic and don't necessarily understand what is at stake when you live in a war zone. And that every single day, it's the life and death of yourself, your family, those around you, and you have to look out for those things. So it's not just, I don't want to gloss over the fact that you have to read these things because of somebody acting in their best interest in the casual way that we would say that in
right.
our American lives. When they're acting in their best interest, there's something really at stake. I want to also ask you, because the other cultural norm that sometimes might escape us is the gender difference. And was there something to leverage being female that your male counterparts couldn't necessarily get in the same situation?
Attention. A lot of attention.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is their only chance to be in a room with an uncovered woman who's not a member of his family. It's very exciting. And for them, even though they act all holier than thou, the truth is any opportunity to flirt was super exciting, and that's how they would view the situation. So obviously, initially, that was an entire disadvantage. But I had, again, been in the Middle East so long, I was so used to that. And I'm like, okay, here we go again. But when I said, okay, can't change this, this is what they're thinking, their mind's in the gutter. When he shakes my hand, he's going to caress my hand as long as possible and try to hold on to it and, delay this touching thing. I know this is what's going to happen. And of course it did every single time. But I thought, you know what? If I can show this guy that I'm really smart and I know his culture and I understand Arabic and I, basically prove to him that I'm somebody he needs to deal with, then he's going to want to impress me because of my gender. So now I have the advantage, and I can use that to my advantage, the fact that he wants to show me how very awesome he is. Okay, we can use it.
Wow.
This is one of my favorite things about working overseas is that, especially in male-dominated societies, every day of the week, twice on Sundays, females who understand how to leverage it can out-collect a dude, because you can be invisible. You can be, if you allow yourself to this be a strength, invisibility is a strength. You can be seen as subservient, like, oh, that's the lady who's the secretary, and the whole time you're working, doing things, and it's enormously powerful, because I've got these other barriers. I wanted to ask about that sufficing behavior that happens, because as a source, they come to you and they want to help you, but sometimes it's just they couldn't get there. It wasn't safe. You've protected them and said, hey, I don't want you to expose yourself to any necessary harm. Whatever, all those things that we're taught to care for the source, to make sure that they're still around. But they still want to provide you with something. And folks in Iraq especially, I found, was like, Mr. Pete, I know a lot of good things, but I had to teach them it was okay to have nothing, that they still were going to have a relationship. There was still going to be an exchange of whatever we were going to exchange. And it took a lot of time. And unfortunately, the amount of times we can meet, at least from my end of the game, and the amount of times I can interact with them in a way where it's beneficial, forced me to make calls that I knew to be suspect, because that was the game. Was that different for you guys at all?
No, I mean, I think that it's so helpful to understand that in their culture, they want to be helpful. It's a very hospitable culture, especially in the Arab world. And so if you ask somebody for something, they want to give you the cloak off of their back, or the last piece of bread. And so it's a culture that doesn't want to say no. And so as an intelligence officer, you have to constantly keep that in the front of your mind. I'm asking him to do A, B, and C. I'm telling him that he's not going to get killed if he doesn't do A, B, and C, which is opposite of what he's been taught his entire life. And so what we saw then were so many sources who weren't motivated by evil intentions, but they needed to bring something to the meeting and therefore would fabricate. And that happened more often than not.
I want to ask you something that I was going to save to the end, but I just can't. And that is, what is worth fighting for?
So the authenticity. So like, I couldn't go into that room acting like Mr. Beast, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Beast and Michelle are totally different people.
No, he was equally flirtatious, though. Let's not fool ourselves.
And after being told for so many years at the CIA that I wasn't capable, and fearing, and believing that I wasn't, it was only when I got in that debriefing room and, let myself be Michelle that I realized how great I could be in ops, and how successful I could be. And so for me, one of the most important things to fight for is your own authenticity, especially in areas, industries, and sectors that tell you you're not good enough as you are.
I want to ask you about that.
Wow.
Oh, sorry, John, go ahead. I'll follow up after. Go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
I want to ask you about that, because one of the things I noticed in the book was, and I don't want to unfairly characterize this as imposter syndrome, but you do have this massive organization with the CIA and all of these incredible names and legends, and it is, for a new person, it's like, my job's to shut up and learn. And then you also get pigeonholed because you're the girl. We ought to watch out how we say things around you. Would that have been, do you think, different if you were in another organization, like if you were in the Army doing human collection, and it's a little more, there's less monoliths to have to deal with, or is that kind of thing just more of your character and how you proceed when you enter into a new environment?
I don't know. I suspect that the environments in other, like in the military and other agencies, were different cultures. I definitely brought in my own issues with me into the CIA, so the imposter syndrome already very much existed for Michelle as a person. And then on top of that, you have the CIA officially telling me on so many levels that I wasn't good enough. So it was almost like I was just getting hit on the head multiple times, starting with the self. I think it's unfortunate, but I get it. People think that if you're smiley and you're friendly and you're outgoing, that you're naive and you lack intelligence and you are incapable of doing things like espionage. And I would, think all the time, like, you're so underestimating me right now because I'm a smiley female. And you don't know how much I know about the Middle East. You don't know how much I've traveled in the Arab world. You don't know how much I've studied the culture. And so it took me so many years in the agency before people started recognizing what it was I brought to the table. And they had to see the substance before they really understood. So just the way that I come off to the world makes people think, I'm not capable of this very, and for to be fair, the Middle East is a really tough place to work, especially for a Westerner. So, I mean, there's a reason why they think, well, you can't do it, because, even just a regular guy can barely do it, if at all.
In my imagination, if you and Joseph hadn't already been together, I saw a guy who underestimated you, and then you flirted with him, and you took him, and you got him out, and he took you to dinner, and then when he dropped you off at your house, you took his wallet. Just on principle. And then you went to work the next day and went, here's your wallet back, you dumbass. And I know you didn't have the opportunity to do that, but that's what went on in my imagination.
That's a great vision.
We can underestimate Michelle no longer. I want to go back to what's worth fighting for and ask you this.
Sure.
What in the subtleties of Arab culture that you got to see that nobody else got to see, what should we learn from the positive interactions that you had? What do you think our culture should learn from Arab culture?
So the biggest thing, which I've already alluded to, is this culture of hospitality. I did not understand what it meant to serve others or have people into your homes until I went to the Middle East. And then I understood. I was like, oh gosh, that's what you're supposed to do when you bring somebody home, and inviting people. And the thing about Arabs is they're very much like a tight-knit community. They expect each other to be involved in the minute aspects of their lives. As Americans, we tend to be a little bit more individualistic in our communities and relationships. And, all the time you go, oh, I don't want to push too far. I don't want to seem too aggressive in relationships, when Arabs expect that of you and like it when you show an interest in them. And so asking detailed questions of an Arab will never offend them. They want that. And so that was really helpful to me as an intelligence officer, because it helped me not feel awkward asking 1,000 questions.
Wow. I feel like there are lessons that we miss out on, and in the way that we have to perceive cultures outside of our own when we exclude. And so politically, I lean to the left on a social, on most of the social stuff, I lean to the left, because I too want to be inclusive, and I know we have to protect our borders and all that stuff, but I think, hey, there's 1,000 things we can learn from each other culture. And since we're a melting pot anyway, we should reach into whomever is, wants to come over and all that stuff. And I know there are going to be people listening going, yeah, but we have to protect. Yes, we have to protect ourselves.
And I think we can do both. That's the great part of all of this, is we can actually achieve both of those objectives.
That's terrific, because we hear a lot about all the things that are, that we think are unusual, and the customs that are, pretty harsh or intolerant for, whatever reason. Those are the things we hear about. We don't hear about how hospitable people are, or how tight-knit the families are, and how those social norms, when it comes to, how strictly you're supposed to adhere to whatever your father says, or those kind of things. There's a plus side to a lot of those things as well. And
yes.
So I'm glad that you talk about those things. I've heard you specify that you were, and I know you can't talk about places you've been, but I've heard you specify that you did spend time in Baghdad.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is there, and just in case you did spend some time in less metropolitan areas, or less urban areas than Baghdad, did you see cultural differences between the rural areas and the more populated areas, the way we have cultural differences?
Such huge differences. And I love talking about this, because people who have never been to the Middle East or have only been as tourists really don't understand how very different cultures are within each country even. And as you mentioned, you've got like say metropolitan Cairo, which is very, very different from Luxor or Upper Egypt or Aswan. And even within each of those villages, you've got different cultures, which you really can't understand unless you get off the beaten path. And so what you find in Baghdad is so very different than when you find what you find in Diyala Governorate or in Mosul or the ancient Christian and Yazidi villages in northern Iraq. And I think that's why I love traveling so much, is I love trying to discover those nuances and those similarities and those differences even within like the country of Iraq.
When you went out, and I don't know how much access you guys had, because you guys work at a different level than guys like I do. I work more in mass. I'm talking to a lot of people, churning through, trying to, I'm not sorting wheat and chaff, but I've got to do a lot more. There's a lot more work that I have to do with a lot more people. You guys get to be a little more refined. One of the things that I developed a skill for, and I don't know how to describe how I did it, but if I went out on a patrol, I could get a group around me of people. There was something about my approach to talking with Bosnians, Egyptians, other Ians, all kinds of people, but I was able to always gather a crowd. Is there something similar that you noticed that you just seem to have a knack for that you couldn't necessarily put your finger on in doing our work?
Oh, I love what you just said, how you have a knack to get a crowd, but not only just to get a crowd around you, but getting people interested in wanting to talk to you. So you were asking the questions that resonated with those people, and they wanted to answer your questions. And also your nonverbals gave off the fact that for whatever reason, you were somebody they wanted to deal with. You were trustworthy, you were nice, you were approachable. All of that makes a difference in that culture, in our culture too. And so for me, what our collection posture was very different. And thank you for calling it more refined. I'm not sure I would call it that, but different. What I found to be so useful to me was dealing with each source as a human being. So a lot of my colleagues would treat, oh, here I'm meeting with this, another source. It's just another meeting with the source, not realizing that every single source has a different level of intellect, a different level of education, a different day job. And so you could not talk, well, you could, but it wouldn't be very effective, talking to people in the same way. I'm going to talk to the guy who sells vegetables very differently than I'm going to talk to the guy who has a doctoral degree from Mosul University. And when you can approach people as an individual and speak to them in a manner that resonates with them, that's what makes a really good intelligence officer.
I think you're just really talking not necessarily about how you garnish information from a particular culture, from Arab culture or any particular culture, because the same would be true if you were talking to, wheat farmer in the middle of the United States or a guy who went to MIT.
Absolutely.
And you're, somewhat describing those differences. And I think Pete had an advantage in that Arab culture is hospitable, and Pete always looks hungry. I'm also getting a kick out of the fact that because this conversation is how it is, I get to jab at Pete, and he doesn't really get to jab back. So anyway, the social dynamic that you talk about, though, when it's the difference between those folks, you still get people who are, I don't know how to say this, but if you have a pomegranate farmer, and a pomegranate farmer who's the elder of the community still gets to have his finger on the pulse of the community, does he not?
Yeah, of course. Every circumstance is different, and you have to know what that is. Yeah, probably or should have access to, and everyone's going to be different. So, yeah. But it's going to, knowing where they come from is going to inform how you interact with them.
So, as you know, but for the audience, one of the things that we're always shopping for in the espionage marketplace is placement and access. We that's what we want. We want to find people that have access, and they're the janitor, they're the assistant to the person that we'd love to have but would never turn for us. So we're always looking for that. And I worked in the Army at one of the source handling schools, fresh out of the field and running sources. So I had a unique and totally accidental. The Army would never do that on purpose, but accidental benefit of saying this is how we do these things. And I was always shocked at what we expect in the ask, right? Because this is a sales thing. What we expect in terms of creating value, and it was almost just like a lot of our peers. I was a little disappointed in their approach because it wasn't that they had a better approach. It just they didn't have one, and it was almost as if like I'm asking, they're going to do it because I've never thought about what it means to know who this person is. That's what I always begged them to know. Like in your dossier, understand who this person is, how his kids are, what he thinks about each kid, why does he pick red socks today over black socks. And every meeting you have to hit these marks, and when you don't, you still have to hit those marks. You just got to do it in meeting 3, 7, 10, and you only get so many meetings, so you have to spend time letting this person know that you know them so you can protect them.
Makes all the difference. And so I think what you're also suggesting, which I say all the time, is that we're not hiring the right people. We need to be hiring people with large amounts of emotional intelligence who get that intuitively. But the fact that it came very easily to you, and you look around, you're like, why is nobody else getting this? Because a lot of that we wouldn't necessarily need to be trained in. We just kind of do that on our own. We're not recruiting the right kind of people into intelligence.
Let me ask you this then. You said emotional intelligence, and I'm pretty critical in the business world, but I think you're going to get where I'm going, because they'll say emotional intelligence, and that's paper thin. They I don't know, they mean empathy or something. But then also, you and I have a command of cultural intelligence, the CQ side of the equation. How do you balance in who has strong EQ and CQ simultaneously, and yet has the ability to suspend and I guess toggle between this is right, this is wrong, because our ethics are definitely situational, and we put ourselves into a lot of different situations.
I've never heard it broken up in that way before, so I'll actually have to do some reading on that. I just understood emotional intelligence to really be the ability to deal with people and to treat them as unique individuals, and being able to do that intuitively, sizing people up quickly, assessing them quickly and easily, judging. You're looking at nonverbals and you don't even know you're doing that kind of thing. And so, empathy is a huge part of that. I don't think you can have an emotional intelligence without empathy. But how do you hire for those? That's a really good question. I think that it takes incredibly long interviews. And I think you have to have emotionally intelligent people conducting the interviews to begin with, because then you can spot each other. You see each other very quickly, right?
Yeah. Okay, let me ask one more follow-up on that then. So in terms of cultural intelligence, which we know we have to have, and emotional intelligence, which we know we have to have, but also that bravery, what are some of the other characteristics? Like if you were going to build a perfect...
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
Clandestine operator. What is that person? How would you want to build them? What do they look like?
They're gritty and determined, and they don't give up easily. I think that a lot of people who are emotionally intelligent, they're smart, but they're not necessarily the valedictorian. And sometimes they're the guy who graduated last in class just because they weren't interested enough in the material to do well. So
it's a different kind of smart.
It is. It's a totally different kind of smart.
But you can't be soft. You have to hear a lot of horrible stories. You and I both have a tale of woe from all these people that crushes us every single day when we hear it. So you can't be incapacitated by that. And listeners know that these are terrible stories of you would never want to hear these stories. They're terrible.
How many torture pictures did you view during your career? how many death pictures? And then you look at it, and then you got to move on. You can't sit and weep and cry and think about what just happened. So you got to get that grit. You just get up, you keep doing, you do what you need to do. So it's finding people who, stare a lot of rejection in the face and keep going anyway. It's the people who just are so determined to stick with it until they solve the problem. Those are the people we're looking for.
And that's the grit of the job that gets overlooked.
Yes, all the time.
And if somebody is wondering why the CIA, clandestine operators, and these relentless
problem, yes.
I sort of want in my again, I'm entertaining myself in my imagination, but what I hope for you and what I hope is happening with the success of your book is that, and what I think you deserve, Michele, is that you've done this great service for us and made sacrifices in a part of the world that a lot of people here are just not willing to leave their safety bubble to go and see, and especially not go and work there in the way that you did and in the capacity that you did. And what I'm hoping for is that when when your book is on a roll the way that it is, that you are handsomely rewarded. And so it's almost like an athlete who gets to enjoy free agency, or the big endorsement deal toward the end of his career after he's won some championships. And I think I hope that that's where your career is pointed. Am I hoping unreasonably?
Well, first of all, that is so very nice of you to say that, and I'm incredibly touched. And I think probably what would really make me feel good would be to know that book speaks for so many of us. So speaks for the Pete Turners of the world and all those other people who put their lives on the line and can't talk about it. I hope that they read that book and say, gee, she's speaking for all of us. And I hope that it honors my colleagues. And I hope that it inspires really good people to get into intelligence, who are the kind of people that we're looking for. And I hope that my book really, this is what gets me. And if she can do it, I can do it. Because that's the entire point.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we mention this too. To talk to Michele online, you can hit her on Twitter at Michele Rigby Assad. She's really easy to find. Her book is called Breaking Cover. And if I haven't already said this 100 times on Twitter, you guys have to read this book. Your projection and hope that I would find as a peer value and relate to the story. Yes, you've done a great job in capturing what it is. Walking into a room with someone sitting there and you have confidence, but you also don't have the first fucking clue in what's about to happen for the next 4 hours. What we really are is we're willing to try. I'm willing to get in there and get after it. And I think you're right in terms of building the perfect clandestine operators. They have to be. I had a colonel tell me this. He's like, Pete, you're an eternal optimist. You want to go out every day. And some of the days, let me ask you this. This is my question. I'm going to tell you my answer on this. I would say 60% of the days were great, and they were interspersed by the other 40%. So maybe it was day, 2 good days, 1 bad day, and then they would go good day, bad day, where you just had to persevere on those bad days and then all of a sudden you'd be like, this is a great day. So the only way to get through that and to hear all of the misery that gets thrown at you by these people that are living these horrible lives is to be an eternal optimist. What's your good day to bad day ratio?
Oh my gosh, I've never been asked anything like that.
Yes.
I would say in Baghdad, it would be only a couple of good days because every single day was so hard. But I would almost have to measure it in good minutes, because even that amazing, 30 minutes you had when we heard back from the military and they said, Michele, that intelligence report was spot on. We found the BBIED, partially constructed, probably would have been deployed in a day or two, and we found it, and now, it won't be set off and 50 people will die. And so you just hung on that, for the next 2 weeks, or, and because you're so exhausted and you've been shelled all day long. You know how it is. You've been shelled all day. You're running into the bunkers. You're looking at torture pictures. You're dealing with life and death, hair on fire scenarios. And so this whole physical exhaustion that is constantly with you makes everything so much more difficult. And so I would say there were probably just those moments of glee when you think, oh my gosh, this is why we're doing this job. This is why my family's in Central Florida and I'm in Baghdad in the middle of a war. This is why I'm working weekends and holidays. This is why I'm missing out on 10 years of births and anniversaries and birthdays and, the good life. That's why. And those things have to carry you through those moments where you just don't think you can take another day in Baghdad.
Let me take what you said, because you said shelled, and I want to make this crystal clear. She means bombs lobbed at her location, right? Not necessarily at Michele, but there are bombs coming at any moment. One of the things that happens as you walk around is you think, if mortars or bombs come now, where do I go? And now, and now. As you walk, constant.
It's just ever present. And you're waiting for that alarm to go off and give you your couple of seconds heads up that a rocket's, midair and on its way to the green zone, on its way to your location. And so it's like every cell in your body is primed to respond to this alarm. And you're constantly looking for where's the next bunker in case I have to run. Right. And when that happens multiple times a day, it just becomes a way of life and a very incredibly stressful one.
So I'm going to do the sound, but this is a sound Michele and I know, and this means that you have literally 5 seconds maybe to get covered. It sounds like this: incoming, 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 incoming. And that right there means at best you lay flat on the ground, and you hope it, and it may not land within 2 miles of you, but that's not how the system works. It warns you. So you're always anticipating that sound. And then there's the ones that get through, and you just hear... You're like, oh, exactly, Jesus.
And then the ground shakes and you smell the pain, and then you're running free because it's never just one, it's multiple rockets. So there's more. So you're just always primed to respond to these really stressful and, rocket launches.
One of the things that I found, especially in Baghdad, because a lot of it happened there, and Mosul sucked, Talafar sucked, all these different places were horrible to have to deal with. But in Baghdad in particular, you could see our failure all over the place. Every time there was a multi-vehicle-borne explosive device blowing up 50, 60, 150 people coordinated. That means someone ran an operation where they built 5 car bombs, deployed them out the same day with 5 different, murder-suicide bomber guys, and blew them up. And that's Michele and I failing right in our faces.
Oh, horrible. The emotional impact of that moment. And I don't know why, but they did it every morning. So they were trying to get maximum impact during rush hour when most of the people are on the street. And so you would wake up to a car bomb almost every day. And it's funny. I never thought of it as, yep, that's your failure, but that's totally what it was. And also, there goes 50, 100 people just died. Great, let's go. We're in Baghdad. Groundhog Day.
Yeah, we had, and this is a really grisly story, and unfortunately, it's maybe the 150th story in my ranking of stories I tell, but we had a vehicle suicide bomb guy go off literally 20 feet from our office. We had a barrier between us, which kept us safe, but bits of that dude and his car fell into our courtyard. And we're supposed to be terrified. No time for that. It was over before you even had time to be scared. And then you go outside, and I'm thinking, man, we are so lucky that this guy, he only killed 2 Iraqis in this case. But again, instead of being afraid and terrified and mortified, I'm pissed that this guy got this thing off without us knowing anything about it. And now I have to double down my work when I've already quadrupled down. There's just no more work I can do. What are your thoughts on that?
No more hours in the day to do it, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, how much I know we would routinely put 16 hours in, and honestly, in the Army especially, if you left at 12 hours of working, you were seen as not pulling your weight.
Loser. Yeah, exactly. Yep, those were long hours, and the waking up the next morning and thinking, my God, I feel just as horrible as when I went to bed. I mean, physically, it's hard to then face another day of that when you just can't even physically get that renewal of sleep.
I thought you said you were trying to inspire smart people to come do this work.
I didn't do it.
You guys are blowing. Yeah, pretty sure you guys are blowing it right now. That's the thing, though. We try to break down these processes and help folks understand these occupations that are unique. And when it comes to your experience and what your experiences have in common, that's the thing, is that the work is not just as you described it, the gathering of information, the breaking down of sources, the creation of relationships, the building of trust, those things. It's also the waking up to car bomb, the constant shelling, the absolute awareness of the minute details all the time, every minute. When you describe a 12, 16-hour, 20-hour day, you're not talking about a 20-hour day where you're, sitting at a desk doing analysis, although I'm sure there was some of that. But all of that is coupled with a constant danger that makes your senses attuned to just such a heightened sense of awareness that it creates a strain that most people don't recognize is really tough on you.
But isn't that life?
And you guys are months at a time.
These careers with these great motivations. People want to be doctors or lawyers, and they get into the field and they realize that, okay, there's this really cool thing that I'm doing, but the reality is that I'm being shelled, or there's a different form of that in every career. And so the grit is being able to hang through those tough moments and those things that make your job so hard to do the thing that you're really called to do, that you love to do. And I think that's what so many people in the world realize, like, okay, I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to save lives, but I have to deal with insurance crap most of the day. But you put up with it because you want to save lives. And so that's what we all have to do, right?
Well, here's why you deserve this handsome reward in the free agency segment of your career, because it is an inspiring story and you did pay your dues. So what I hope as the success of the book progresses is that people get it. I hope that people get it, because there's a rich reward in there for all of us to read the stories of crossing of cultures, not just saving of lives, but of, the nitty gritty in the bridging of the gaps and the building of the trust and all of the things that you went through that made your experience special.
Thank you so much. I'm just so amazed that there are so many people in the world, and I hear from them on a daily basis that say, I want to make a difference. You've inspired me that I have the ability to do so. And I read your book, and I read the details of how hard it is, and I'm still willing to do that. People are generally really good. They want to do something impactful. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to say, it doesn't take a superhero to do it. It's the regular Joes and Michelles in the world that can make a difference. It just showing people that they have what it takes to be successful is, I think, really critical here.
Wow.
I was going to change gears for a second because we have the whole love fest going on, and I appreciate that. But before we run out of time, and we don't have to do this, but I was going to offer you the opportunity. You've been on hundreds of interviews. You've talked all over the place. And again, it's Michele Rigby Assad, and her book's called Breaking Cover. I've read it. It's basically my memoir, just written by her. So thank you for that. What do you want to ask me as a peer, someone who's been in the same area, someone who's looked for that guy that lobbed all those mortars, like the guys that would pop out of Solder City? I chased that guy. I tried to find out who he was for a long time. What do you want to ask me?
First of all, thank you for
Hold
that.
on. If that book had been your memoir, you would have soiled yourself in the book, Michele. So
Oh, yeah.
let's not say that was Pete's
That's true.
memoir. Exactly. That was a lot of things that Pete did. Couple things.
I won't put
Pete
Michele
did
on the
were left
spot,
out.
but there's nobody that escapes Iraq without some kind of dysentery story. It just doesn't. Everybody.
So I would say one of the coolest questions I got was one point, and when you talk about these things, it still gives you chill bumps up and down your body. What was a moment that in your operational life that made you think, oh my gosh, this is exactly why I'm doing this? Some success that you had that you just thought, wow, this is why I'm here.
I'm thinking, because I got to talk to thousands of Iraqis because I was there for so long and out every day talking to 2, 3, 4, 10 people a day. So when you have someone come up to you and tell you something that happened through your own work indirectly, they have no idea it's me that did it, but I know the story behind their story. And to hear that, to know that I saved their life, because of course I want to save American lives. That's my job. But the byproduct is that the area gets a little bit more safe. They're able to stand up on their feet. I can have a sense of pride in knowing that. One of my favorite friends, he's an interpreter from Iraq, from Mosul. His name's Johnny Walker, and he wrote a book, and he now lives in the U.S. and he's the greatest American I know. He's not even a citizen yet, but he will be. But he is exactly what it is. He tried his hardest to save his country, stay there and live there, and it just wasn't going to happen. And he's here now, knowing what he went through and how 9 lives. That guy's had 20 lives.
Wow.
Him being here, having kids raised here, because we were there. If it's not much, but that for me is what it's about. And those stories, thinking specifically about a guy, and it doesn't matter who he was, because who knows him, but him just saying, we lived this day because you guys did this one thing, and
wow.
being responsible directly for that one thing. It's that, like that's when the hunk of the guy's leg falls down on my patio and I'm like, that guy blew himself up. We never knew about it. That's the other end of it. The good side is when the guy says, you guys saved my life that day.
And now the lives of his family and his children and his children's children, who now have an opportunity to make something really great of their lives.
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. So exciting.
Yeah, you got another one for me? I'm ready.
No, I'm just, what do you say after that?
I know, right? No, I mean, it's success is not measured in large numbers, but really the lives of individuals that that you've had an impact on. And those stories, that's why they touch us for the rest of our lives. That's so cool.
Yeah, every time I see him, I think about, he walked up to me one day, and this is in 2004, where it was open season on Iraqis killing each other. And this was not about religion. It was about politics. It was about survival. And if you had the wrong ID on you, and these guys would have 3 and 4 IDs to make sure they pulled the right one out. And it's like, which shoe is my ID in today?
Yeah.
Like it's crazy.
Exactly.
And listeners, every day there's people showing up in a gutter with their head torn off. So this is, the stakes are as high as they can be. And to run around in that area and have Johnny survive and come to me one day and say, Peter, I need money for a gun. Okay.
Wow.
Let me get that money for you. Hold on, and let me get you a raise, so you can feed your family and everything else. All of these things that we have to do that are not part of the job, that are absolutely part of the job.
Yeah, that's so cool that you could have the sensitivity and to know when somebody really needed your help, and needed something extra like that. I mean, that's the thing about Iraq that people don't understand who didn't serve there. It wasn't like Sunnis against Shia and that's the end of the story. It was Sunnis against Shia, Sunnis against Sunnis, families against families. I mean, it was such a fight for resources on every level,
That's right.
resources and control. And so it made it a very nasty and very difficult to understand fight.
Yeah, I ran around the farm areas out there in the Madain district of Baghdad, and we saw tons of that. There was it's where Salman Pak was, if you remember that area at all. But there was so much of that where my cousin took this goat and I'm going to kill him, so I killed him, and now like my other cousin's wife now belongs to the other cousin, and that guy hates that wife because she's now a whore, whether she is or not doesn't matter. He says that all these things, all this pain, all this hate, and it's within the same family, and it's over a goat or a lamb or chickens.
Yeah.
It's
right.
Craziness.
They don't forget.
No, they don't. And the other thing is we don't perceive, you and I can, because we're at the, actually we're at the tip of the spear. Heck, we're in front of the spear in the cafe talking to people. But we can see that, hey, Army, chill out. This is not your business. This is not Army business. This is family business.
Right.
And we, as the Army, can't stand that. Like, nope, that guy's a murderer. We're going to go get him. And then they go get him. It's like, and now he's out again.
Yeah. I know. And as Americans, we like to see things in very clear black and white, and we feel very uncomfortable with shades of gray. We just don't know what to do with that. But most of the world is shades of gray and, everything in between.
Yeah. Yeah. It's That is for sure. The Army loves to, and I'm saying the Army, all of the military, they love to go out and be effective. And one of the
This group is good. This group is bad. This guy is good. This guy is bad. When in actuality, we're all good and we're all bad.
yeah, how much of this crime is crime? How much of this crime is war? That was a question I asked the intelligence people all the time, and they never even considered that option. Like, you're fighting crime, and you don't know which side's the good side, bad side, because no one has enough stuff. You're fighting...
Right, and everyone's guilty. Everyone's killing everybody else. Who's the innocent part here? Oh, I'm not really sure. I don't think there are any.
It took me a long time to develop the ability to gain the trust of the commander to say, black market gasoline is not a problem that you have to worry about.
Right, exactly.
Like, that's called survival, and that's a guy that's not killing people. So for right now, is he funding the insurgency? I don't know. I don't know that we're not the insurgency, because no one believes in this government. So we're kind of the insurgents. So let's let that person eat for a day, and move on from other things. What were some lessons like that you learned? Were like, hey, looking for, because we had to look for fuel a lot of crime-based things. What were some of those things where you're like, that's just nonsense, I'm not focused on that?
Oh my goodness. Because my focus was specifically counterterrorism, it was very clear. I mean, we were looking for Al-Qaeda in Iraq and looking at other insurgent groups. But what really irritated me was how he would say, well, that guy's not part of an insurgent group. I'm like, well, today he's not, but yesterday he was. Or, so they didn't quite understand this whole changing allegiances bit.
Right.
And how they say, well, he's a member of this other group, and so therefore he's okay. I couldn't understand how my colleagues could not grasp the complexity of these issues. So again, they were looking for good or bad, and I'm like, well, you need to understand today he's this and tomorrow he's that. And how we also in the U.S. government put people in the neat categories, like, okay, if you're Al-Qaeda in Iraq, you're a terrorist. But if you're Shia and you lob rockets at us, you're a militant, and we don't classify you as a terrorist. But you're killing just as many people with your rockets. We have very strange definitions in the U.S. government of what a terrorist is. So, and what we put our resources towards.
Yeah, we do struggle with that. I remember, again, outside of the green zone, looking for the person doing the mortars. For every night there was a mission after dusk, and it was what they call an interdiction mission. And what we were trying to do is be in the area of where the launches were known to have come from. Right?
Yes.
So I ran these things all the time, and my job, if I go around and say, where are the bombs? No one's ever going to tell me where the bombs are. That's just not how it works. I know that works that way in the movies, but no one is going to do that. If I'm in the neighborhood, show up unannounced and ask. So I would just go and find out how things were in the neighborhood, and then we might, someone else in the patrol with a uniform on might ask a question about the launch the other night and everything. It's the only way to make it work. And we were effective at being in the way and keeping them guessing on where we might be. We had one platoon, though.
Interesting, because most people don't understand. They're like, why didn't you just shoot back? Well, the thing was, we had full launch platforms, which we called shoot and scoot, which meant they could lob off 6 rockets at us at a time and then get out of Dodge. And then if we were to shoot back, we would take out a village. And so it made it very difficult for us to find these guys who were shooting at us multiple times a day. And then thank you that you were part of this mission to try to identify the areas where they were using that particular field or that particular road to launch those rockets and cause such mayhem in the green zone.
Yeah, and I guess we should maybe clarify even more. So you and I both know those bombs originated out of Sadr City. So imagine, if you will, a neighborhood that's walled off that the Americans during this time weren't even allowed to go into, and rightfully so, because it was a hornet's nest. You would,
hostile territory.
Yeah, you would go in there and cause more problems by going in. Yes, you could go in there and shoot everybody in there, but that would only make things worse. So we all agreed, both sides, we'll just stay out of there. You guys hang out in there. But they would pop out and then just boom, 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 throw a couple of grenades, flying through the air, and they'd blow up when they landed in the green zone or my camp where I was at. So we're trying to chase something that's very hard. And really what we're doing is just being in the area in case we get lucky, in case our presence makes them not do it that night. We're just trying to reduce the damage because you really couldn't stop it. But one of the units, and this is when Iraq was kind of chilled out. This is post-surge. Things were working. People were trying to get back to order. And the thing I was learning was that the specter of danger was way more present than the actual danger in the area. People were terrified to poke their head out of the door, and these are Iraqis. So we'd walk around these neighborhoods, and they would interact with us a little bit, but they had no faith in the security in the area. So here we are losing the fight every day because no one believes the police and the army can protect them. And we have this patrol with this infantry platoon, U.S. platoon, and they would go around and they would march around, and routinely the Iraqis would, the only time they would ever call the police was when we would walk through the neighborhood in this one unit, and they would say the Americans are invading us because our position, our posture was so hostile. So I'm like, hey, this is terrible that this is happening, but it's also good because we've got Iraqis calling the police. I don't know how we make this go any better, but that's how challenging this environment was you're out trying to stop something that's damn near impossible so that Michelle doesn't get shot 20 miles away. And you can't go chase the person where they're at. No one wants that. And when we go around, the only time people believe in the police is when they see us there. So we're the only reason anybody ever calls the police, and that's only if we're being dicks. Fix that problem.
Right. And ultimately, from their perspective, we were occupiers. We were in control of their country, and they didn't want us there. And I remember at different points actually talking to the Sunnis and saying, look, we're not your issue. We want to leave. We really do want to get out of this country. I think what you really need to be concerned with is Shia and Iran. And they'd be like, oh, it's funny how they never strategically thought about it in that manner. And so that was a real turning point for a lot of them. Oh, okay. So you're not here to run this country, for the rest of our generation. No, we really don't want to. We want out. If you keep fighting us, we're going to stay and keep surging more troops. And so you're achieving the opposite of what you want to achieve.
It's funny you say that because I talk to a lot of Shia, and they would say, the second you guys leave, this whole thing's going to be crazy because Iran. These are Shia guys, right? They're like, Iran is absolutely running our government, and they don't care about us. They want to undermine us. And they were absolutely suspect of Iran from the start, but they weren't the ones doing the counter-terror, I guess, that you guys were focused on. These guys were the other side that were like, we're stuck in the middle. We're to hide with these guys with religion, but understand, we're Iraqis. We like to party. I want to go out to the Karada Peninsula and go to the disco and dance and drink. So if you think I'm worried about Muslim stuff? Like, are you kidding me? No, I'm worried about Iran and them undercutting our tomato crop. And, I'm like...
Yeah, and sending in the mullahs to tell us what we can and cannot do.
Right.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Super complicated. And I really appreciate you talking with us because this is... And I'm going to give John one more question, but it's so fun to be able to talk from this point of view. And I know, like, you've been on Fox and everybody else, you've been on all of them, but I love that you get to talk to another spy and go spy to spy, and have these conversations because no one talks about this stuff. And we're not talking anything classified, but it's fun, right?
Yeah, it's the best to talk to somebody who used the same tradecraft and understands operations.
My last question to you is this. My favorite question to ask that really worked well for me, and I wrote it hard, was Shunu Rayak. What's your opinion, basically, on fill in the blank? Do you have a question like this where you're like, this is my go-to? I always get this question in.
Oh, boy. You mean with a source?
In general, what's one of your go-to questions that you ask when you want to get somewhere?
Oh, to really get to know, my go-to question really is, so, what motivates you? I love asking people, what gets you out of bed every day?
Yeah.
Because then I can understand what kind of a person they are based on their response.
I'm a spy. I just lied to you. I have to ask you one more question. And I didn't realize this until you said that question to me. When I would go on these patrols in particular, but a lot of other things, I would think, what do I want to know? What does that conversation look like? And I would work backwards. If I want to know who is the guy who's launching the mortars at Michelle in the green zone, what's the question before that one? And what's the question before that one? And I would backwards plan out my questions to see if I could at least get into the funnel where I might get to where those questions are. Does that make sense at all to you?
Oh, perfect sense. My problem is I have 1,000 questions and I always pepper people with all of them. So I'm just always trying to ask people, where are you from? What do you do? What's your mission in life? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And I think because they're such direct questions, you really tend to get the truth, especially when they don't expect those things. And they tend to answer them very honestly. Anyway, people are very open. They want to talk about themselves. It's very easy to get to the truth.
John, last questions for you, and then feel free to close it up after that.
Well, I agree that people want to talk about themselves, and you can get to the truth with those things. But when you have to sort out all of the truths, that I think becomes part of the magic that you created over there. Not just your ability to dig out all those details, but to sort them out so that you could get to what is useful. And I think my close for you is just this question, which is really, what's next for you in your career?
So what's next is having the opportunity to use this book as a platform for speaking engagements. So I love getting in front of young people who are in high school and university and helping them figure out what their mission in life is. I love talking to women's executive groups and helping them to see how they can use their unique skills and expertise in industries that they thought were formerly unwelcoming to them. I love speaking to men who get like these really crazy topics of war and counterterrorism, and we can talk about crazy things. I just love using my stories to inspire others, because I feel like this is this amazing platform. People want to know about the CIA. They want this special insights. And nobody from the CIA has ever used this incredible platform to inspire others. And that is my mission. That's what I'm trying to accomplish with the book and what comes after the book.
Wow. Well, everybody, read the book. Reach out to Michele on Twitter. She's Michele Rigby Assad. My mind is blown. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michele.
Thanks so much for having this incredible conversation. I love talking to really intelligent people. It's so much fun. And people could also feel free to reach out to me on my website, micheleRigbyAssad.com, as well as LinkedIn and Facebook under all three names, Michele Rigby Assad. And I love to get questions from people, hear their comments, and see how I can be of service to others in my next non-government position.
I love it. We got to get you, me, Robin Dreek, Barsky. We got to get all these guys all together in the same room and just charge folks tickets and just freestyle a conversation.
How fun.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thanks a lot, Michele. Thank you very much. Everybody, buy Breaking Cover.